So we'll begin. I will begin by introducing Pat Farrington, who is our star poet here today. Pat Farrington spent her formative years in West Africa, experiencing close encounters with scorpions, locusts, and snakes, and being balefully eyed up by vultures. Exiled to England for school, she went on to work as an editor in publishing, had a brief spell as a primary teacher, and then nearly 20 years as a director and producer for the BBC Schools Television, where, among other things, she wrote song lyrics for young children. Then Pat brought writers into schools for a charity, and then, apart from taking up environmental activism, she retired to an allotment where she provided meals for pests, which she later recognized as being essential parts of the ecosystem. Her two grandchildren, Rosa and Ada, are a joy to her and offer her heartwarming opportunities to see the natural world through her eyes, through her children's eyes again. Thank you so much, Pat, for being here. It's a real pleasure.
Well, thank you everybody for coming.
So we'll begin this evening with some questions, and there will be some poetry readings interluded in these questions. So first and foremost, so Only One Earth is a very powerful title, which gives us a good entry point into what your collection wants to convey and to achieve. So could you talk a little bit about why this title felt necessary at this moment in history, particularly given the urgent environmental warnings that we are facing nowadays?
Well, I chose it because we're at climate midnight, and with the current floods, hurricanes, and droughts, there's now a clear and present danger to people on Earth. In October this year, it was clear that we'd failed to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees, and we have to change course. Many people choose not to act on this from fear, denial, or greed. And on greed, I'm looking straight at the fossil fuel companies. So the title is On the Nail. It's polemical, and it has to be because there's no planet B. It's a call to action. Let us not become a plague of locusts upon the earth. And the collection is underpinned by the idea of paradise, the fall, and a potential apocalypse. It will be more fun later, I tell you. The most polemical poem calls for protest. Millions of us to come out on the streets to put pressure on the pillars of privilege to get rid of fossil fuels.
Thank you very much. That's a great introduction. I particularly like the plague of locusts, so that we shouldn't become a plague of locusts. I think this is a great metaphor that runs throughout your the whole collection. And I was wondering what is the aim of this collection?
Well, can I just say that I experienced being besieged by locusts, so it has a personal meaning for me. Um, yeah, the aim, it's both a celebration of the natural world and an elegy for all its losses, not just of individual species, but sometimes whole ecosystems. And the epigraph in the book sums up the purpose. It's from Robert Burns, which I'm sure you know, to a mouse. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union. So humans have become the apex predator, upsetting the equilibrium of the web of life. And here in the UK, sadly, we're the most nature depleted country in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. I think precisely that those concerns, environmental concerns, and also thinking about the environment and the elements of the environment are being, you know, besieged by these current issues such as animals and different plants and um, ecosystems. It's just so it's unbelievable the fact that a lot of people don't realize how urgent this is. So I think this collection comes in a very good moment. It's very timely. Um, and you range from themes of survival to compassion towards animals and the longing for a perfect world as well. So I would like to know, in a way, what experiences in your life have strongly shaped the poems that appear in this collection, and how do they feed into your poetic style?
Survival must come from being a child brought up in West Africa and seeing subsistence farmers struggling against a harsh tropical climate, as I described in the poem Sisyphean. The sun slashing its whips across bowed shoulders, bent over bone-dry crops destined to crumple. This is now much worse with desertification caused by climate change, with the Sahara creeping south all the time. This poem is important in drawing attention to climate justice, which recognizes the unequal impacts of climate change, particularly on those countries who have contributed the least. Compassion for animals must come from many hours a young child spent seeing lizards, chameleons, and insects living their own lives, struggling to find food and shelter. My brother and sisters and I felt a real affinity for lizards in particular, as they seemed curious and unafraid, stopping to look at us as if we were being considered as fellow creatures. The longing for a perfect world comes from my reading of John Clare, that's 1793, 1864. He was the first ecological poet who wrote about his childhood experience of living in a rural paradise in Northamptonshire before the enclosure of common land by the landowners. Watching a nightingale sing, he then wrote, her wings would tremble in her ecstasy, and feathers stand on end as 'twere with joy, and mouth wide open to release her heart. You can feel his belief in the unity of all living things.
Thank you very much for quoting Burns, and I think this is a very beautiful quote that you mentioned that really encapsulates this idea of protecting the animals. And on that note, lots of your poems you have in this collection give a voice to the animals by speaking from their point of view and also imagining how it would be in the shoes of those animals, although they don't have shoes, but you know what I mean, metaphorically.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting concept in which we try to um, find compassion for the creatures that do not have a voice. So I really want to know what drew you to explore these point of views from the point of, from the point of view of animals.
No, thank you. Well, as you know, recent debate on the rights of the natural world, and in particular the rights of animals, really resonates with me. It's now moving, interestingly, towards discussion of animal ethics, the moral relationship between humans and other living creatures, and how we ought to treat them. In a poem at the end of Only One Earth, I describe how we have treated animals as meals, experiments, and servants. And while writing these poems, I realized that humans were the apex predators I mentioned, which led me to want to give the animals a voice, as in this poem I'll read called If We Could Voice Out Loud. I love Ice Age animals and cave drawings, which is why I wrote it. Once upon a time, we were sacred. Our likenesses on cave walls, drawn between two worlds through a membrane, magicked up in charcoal and ochre, making us all come alive by the flickering light of limestone lamps, entrancing you. But your drawings could not capture us, lords of the earth, a roaring river of sun-glinting fur, massive bison, lions, saber-toothed tigers, and leopards surging towards our hunting grounds, chasing the antelope, challenged by you, our stick-legged rivals. Then you multiplied and multiplied, cutting up our cape of forests, no longer lords of the earth, but subjects isolated on green islands. If we could all voice out loud what we think of erstwhile worshippers, we would roar, "Just who do you think you are?"
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that impressive reading. I really like the way you impersonated, um, the creatures in this poem and how they are, you really get into the problem, the conflict between humans and animals and other types of creatures. And because they don't really have a voice, I think this poem particularly um, serves as a way for us to know a possible thing that they might say about, us humans. It's like a reversal of instead of us talking about animals, the animals are talking about us humans, like a critique on how we interact with them and destroy their ecosystems and the way we treat them. So I think this is a very powerful poem. This is nearly by the penultimate section of the poetry collection in Stewardship. So yeah, that was very impressive. I think the title also gives away a lot of um, you know, insights into what is the type of voice that could come from an animal. How would they articulate something that they cannot express? So that's very interesting and also very poetic in every single way. Thank you so much. What do you think about um, poetry being used to give words to animals specifically?
Um, well, I think Ted Hughes did it extraordinarily well in Crow, and I don't know of other poems that have actually had that power, really. And I think it must come from using the first person singular.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Inheriting or kind of writing from the I am as the animal or the insect, um, which really makes you step into the shoes of an animal or insect and think like them, which is something we don't often do. So great, I really like the concept of impersonating animals. So. Next, I would like to ask you, so we're going to go more about your writing process and the creative sort of process that you go through when you wrote this poetry collection. So how do you come up with the ideas or with the images, and how do they become full poems?
Um, that's a good question. It varies from poem to poem, but I picked out four sort of sources of inspiration, really. I think sometimes it's something I've read about, like the loss of 90% of nightingales in the UK, which really shocked me. Um, and I thought about it. It kept me awake at night, actually. And in the morning, I sat up in bed and I sketched out a poem to express my sense of loss, really. I looked up nightingales and found they've been traditionally called the voice of nature, which is the title of the poem. And I discovered why their song is so treasured, which is because there are 1,000 different phrases. And the next bird down, as it were, is the blackbird with only 100. So I learn things all the time. And I thought that's why the nightingale is so special, really, and why pretty much any poet in the past has written about the nightingale, which is why I didn't try an ode. um, uh, The one I have tried, actually, it ends with a lament, which is, please don't tell me nightingales will just be found in odes. And this is also an image or memory which haunts me, which illustrates an idea. So in a poem I've written called Painting a River, East and West, I remember very vividly being at an exhibition of Chinese art and walking along a 30-foot horizontal painting of a river, which made you feel as if you were in the river itself. It was quite strange and very moving, actually, very peaceful. Whereas I think it made me realize that in most Eastern cultures, and I hope it's still the case today with most people there, is that they see themselves as being a part of nature, whereas I think in the West that we have become apart from nature. And that's due mainly, I think, from the belief from the Bible about God giving man the dominion over all living things. So the second part of my poem needed contrast, which was the painting of the lock by Constable, and that's about taming water. And it ends by saying, we are onlookers at nature, and the painting is like a butterfly pinned under glass. It felt very, very different writing those two verses. Third point is that some poems write themselves in a very weird way, actually. In the first poem in the collection called Attitude, Ted Hughes, I've mentioned before about crow, using the first person singular, I revisited an old poem of mine about an experiment on intelligence in crows. That was in the third person, but using the first person made the new version actually come alive. And as soon as I thought of the first line, it starts, I crow from New Caledonia, no less, because crows from New Caledonia are the cleverest in the world. It kind of fell out of my head, really, in a dramatic monologue, and actually was the most fun poem I've ever written. And the last point is, in some ways, the most fruitful way is a spark that comes from my own lived experience, such as the next poem I'll read called Straight in the Eye. And it's about my ongoing battle with a robber squirrel who steals food from the little birds that I love so much, like robins and blue tits. So if you'd like, I'll read Straight in the Eye. This is
Please, yes.
this is up close and personal, I tell you. I live not just in a house, but in a habitat, sharing the land around, not only with the skinny young fox who look me straight in the eye, staring through my window at human luxury one snowy, hungry winter's day, but also the robber squirrel who chews through string, holding the half coconut of bird food, juicy suet, nuts and seeds, hugging its booty in its front paws and running off on its hind legs in an unnervingly human way. And the next day, paws up, asked me for more, and the very next week returns and, getting no response, gnaws on its front paw.
Thank you very much for that reading. It's an excellent poem. You really incorporate great images, but also create humor, which is something I really appreciate throughout so many of these poems that are at the same time, um, you know, intellectually compelling, but at the same time they make you it's light. They make you feel refreshed or they have something funny in it. And I think it's a fantastic image that you painted here of this squirrel kind of robbing off the food that you have set for the bird. So this is a very iconic image that tells us that, animals don't often know that this food is meant for animals. They don't know. They just see the food and they just go for it, right? It's their instinct. And I see the titles being straight in the eye, something that, it's very difficult for us to communicate to animals. How are they meant to know that this is meant for the birds and not for them? Um, and they don't know that you got angry with this squirrel, for example, which is interesting, the same way, the same connection that they have amongst themselves might be the same connections that we humans have with each other. And it might be difficult to get out of the human language and translate it into the different languages that nature talks. And I think this poem was spectacular in that sense. So, talking about humor, I think that, humor is a very nice way to bring people together when it comes to poetry, because poetry is not just about seriousness and beauty, but also moments of light and happiness, sometimes something that makes you see life in a more in a fun way, right? So how does humor function in these environmental poems without diluting the message? That would be my question, because you do have very strong messages, but they also contain humor. So how did you manage this balance between having a strong take on nature, but also being, kind of comedic in a way?
Well, that's a very good question. Uh, I'd say I can't really help myself because without humour, this collection, much of which is about threats to the environment, would be too hard to read. Uh, um, so it sweetens the message, but I think most importantly, people actually remember things that make them laugh. And we need cheering up in a dark world.
Thank you. That's a really good point, indeed, because with all of these environmental crises, it just seems that everything's so bleak. There's no hope. There's no, it brings us down a lot to hear all this bad news on the TV or in the papers. There's always this negativity coming up about the doom. We talk about the human doom, and the end of the world. Um, which is in a very pessimistic, approach. So how would someone read for pleasure something that's supposed to be for entertainment, such as poetry, and not fall into this trap of pessimism? So I think this collection does that perfectly well, and that's why I really, really appreciate the poems in here, and I would recommend this to anyone who is struggling to find hope within the environmental crisis scope. Um, so now let's talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty for those of here who are very interested in poetic structure and poetic techniques. So I noticed you have different styles throughout the poems, and it was a pleasure to read the different paces and the different rhythms that it has. So how do you come up with these choices in a way in order to shape your poems? And do you find certain forms or techniques particularly suited to this ecological theme?
Can I just say before we say that I'm winning against the squirrel and that actually these close encounters with wild animals are, I think, a kind of portal into other worlds. And I really like this idea that in some ways you can enter portal if you're patient and you interpret gesture. Okay, the question. Well, the form I like best is the Anglo-Saxon meter, which I'm sure you know is two strong beats, a pause, and two more strong beats in every line, and with as much alliteration as you can manage. But the problem is finding the theme to suit this really epic style. And the only true example in my collection is a poem called After Jerusalem, which is about an earth giant who takes revenge on a plague of people for their ravages on the earth by breaking the sea walls. And I'll read you just the end of the poem. Sky and cloud eyes flash in the sun as he crumbles the walls, breaks them like bread, flooding the land with a fierce rush of sea. Corpses and cars and skeleton flat screens, all swept away by the fierce rush of sea, swelling and roaring in his clay sculpted ears. I read it to a friend this morning and I said, "Are you scared?" And she said, "I'm pleased."
Amazing. Thank you so much for reading that section. I think the rhythm that you provide in these two verses, in these two stanzas, just makes us realize how beautiful poetry connects with nature. They're sort of like in tune. The rhythm of nature seems to have rhymes and meter, which I find extraordinary. Which is why I find poetry particularly a good way to talk about nature. I think from the Romantics, we would see loads of poetry written about nature, and there's a good reason for it. Poetry provides us with the musicality of nature, the rhythm of the world, and its voices as well. So, thank you so much for reading. Do you have anything else to add in terms of
Well,
rhymes and
yeah, thank you. I'm very fond of the Japanese haiku ranga, and in the longer version, it's 575 syllables in 3 lines, I'm sure you know, and then 2 lines of 7 syllables. And it offers a snapshot. It's precise and poignant and hopefully memorable because of its brevity. So, can I add a poem
yes,
from my
please.
allotment? It's called Allotment Decisions. My robin or yours? I'm teasing my plot neighbour. We decide it's ours, while its beady eyes decide which human will serve it best. That's an ongoing um, uh, banter between myself and my plot neighbour when I see him in the street.
Lovely.
Um, okay, other things. I dislike rhymes. Keats described them as chasing from pole to pole for rhymes because they're a straitjacket. I prefer half rhymes and assonance. I like telling a story to draw readers in. And I was so pleased when you said you had to stop eating your lunch, Erwin, after reading the first verse of the poem about the crow, to find out what happened at the end. I shall always remember that. Thank you. I try to make my poems as accessible as possible, often in a conversational style, as you've seen. But I aspire to allegories, which are really hard to write, but they're rewarding in terms of layers of meaning. And there's one in the collection right at the end called Legacy, about the last leaf falling from the tree, which will enrich the earth. But it's also about humans and the legacy we leave, which is not as good as the leaves, I'm afraid. So,
Thank you. I think, would you mind if, I mean, if you have the poem in front of you, would you mind reading it, Legacy?
I'll find it.
I think it would be a good way to
Wow.
put this.
I've not rehearsed this.
It's
Okay,
okay, no worries.
bear with me. In distress, the last leaf quivers, fragile stalk no longer turning in the sun, veins thinning by the day, like elders everywhere, but not yet dry enough to drop. This relic must be shaken free. Blustering winds whip the leaf backwards and forwards in a frenzied tussle. Last slap snatches it off, eddying, dancing freely in death, spiraling down to the ground, and over time it enriches the earth.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that reading. Indeed, I think this is a very important poem in the collection, and there's a reason why we've decided to put it in the at the very end. Well, just right before the last poem, which is called Only One Earth, which is the title of the book. Um, would you be able to tell us a bit more about in what hopes do you expect the readers to find this poem close to their hearts? And because, of course, we have images that are very potent and very, sometimes it could lean um, to the bleakness of our future, but in a way also see the silver lining, see a bit of light in there. So how would you describe this? Even some words seem to be very diametrically opposed, like dancing freely in death, which is a fantastic line. Um, you know, how do you combine and why is it important to combine these images of death and the falling leaves um, with the beauty of it. So, for example, in winter when we have all the leaves falling, but it's also beautiful in a way. So, how does death and beauty kind of um, overlap in this poem?
Well, I think the cycles of nature in the Northern Hemisphere actually um, it goes into a kind of death in winter and then recovers and in spring. I mean, Eliot said, winter was like an etherized patient upon the table, and that you needed spring. Um, and I remember seeing somewhere that David Hockney said when he went to California, he'd been there about 10 years, and he said, it's just one bloody blue sky after another. And I miss the seasons. So I think the seasons give us a huge amount in the Northern Hemisphere. Um, in the tropics, it's dry season or wet season, and it's very dry and it's very wet, And so actually, that's one nice thing about England is the seasons.
Yeah, I really agree with you. It's been just a few months that I'm here in England, and I can see the stark difference, entering what's going to winter. There is definitely a very drastic shift in the landscape. Even in the city, even if there's not that many trees here, you can still see the bleakness in the weather, for example, in the sky, in the clouds, which is not always the same for other countries, notably the ones that are more in the center or that receive more sun. But there's still this idea of the cycle of life, how things come to an end eventually, and how we have to think about, you know, rebirth in a sustainable way, not in terms of trying to romanticize it, but in a way trying to make sense of it, finding our humanness within our time in this earth. And just like the trees and animals who every year go through the cycle, we also have to understand that this cycle affects us and it's inevitable, just as you know, but it doesn't have to be the doom. It just means a shift, a renewal, and that's the renewal that we can bring to the future, right?
Well, I've changed the title from The Last Leaf to Legacy because actually we should all be aware of our legacy on this earth. And it seemed to sort of make more sense, really, to think about the consequences of our actions, really, which is why the dedication is to my grandchildren who will tread this earth more lightly.
Yes. Oh, I love that dedication, treading the world more lightly. That's indeed something that I I think everybody should just sink in this sentence. What does it mean to tread lightly on this earth? What would it mean for us as humans to tread lightly, not just in the physical, actual sense, but metaphorically? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think consumerism in itself is has created a huge problem materially. I mean, the piles
Mhm.
of rubbish sent off to West Africa and other places. Um, uh, and also, I think spiritually, actually, that we surrounding ourselves with goods. And I can't remember now which Greek philosopher said it's the goods of the soul, that matter.
Mm.
Aristotle, I'm guessing. Somebody help.
I've no idea. If someone knows, please leave it in the chat. That would be very interesting to look up.
I think
Um,
I think it's Aristotle. It coming to mind that um, I'm not sure it's a good translation. The goods of the soul, the riches of the soul,
mm,
or the riches of the mind, whichever
mm,
um, way you want to look at it. Really, I think there's another way of putting it actually, which is just uh, interesting, which is uh, you're not alone. You're never alone with the arts.
mm.
Which
Yeah.
I thought was interesting because actually you're then um, uh, inside somebody else's mind, really. You may not understand it, and in some cases you might not like it actually, but um, at least you have. Well, I think I come back to this word portal, really.
Yeah, it's like a transition, like this liminal space, where we transition from one way of being into another and into a different sort of uh, way of living and experiencing the world as humans. So it does feel actually like a portal. We transition, we stop, we leave behind the human world per se, and we enter into the animal world. So this is so sort of portal as well, and the way we come out of the portal, we have the last poem, which is Only One Earth, which encapsulates, as we said, the whole collection. Also, I'd like to point out how you came with the decision of having the last poem being at the center, very center of the page, because this was something you said this must be the way the last poem is displayed or laid out in the collection. So, um, what do you make out of it? The layout of this last poem.
Well, I think the loneliness of the earth, really. Shall I read it? Because it's very short.
Yes, yes, sure.
It's all right. Veiled in wisps of white, an orphan planet spins in dense infinity. And that's just a haiku on its own without the renga bit, but you don't need it really. You just need those three lines really to say how lonely we are. And look what we've done.
Yeah. It really makes you think when you mention the orphan planet spins in death's infinity. An orphan planet, yeah, indeed, is, thinking about not just um, a planet Earth. Well, it's as if the planet would be dissociated from the other planets in a way. We feel completely hopeless. Um, but also, when you mention veiled in wisps of white, sorry, it just tells us there is only one of these possible planets. There's only one you. There's only one United Kingdom. There's only one Mexico. There's only one France, etc. There's only one planet like ours. So no matter how much you want to travel to Mars and try to make a new society over there, as in Elon Musk's or whatever, is not go- it's never going to be the same planet as we know it, with all its beauty and richness and culture and history. It's never going to be like that. So there's only one single planet, and I think this kind of the orphan planet evokes both the way that this is it. So take care of it because this is the only one. And orphan as in not having a mother as well. Orphan as in who's gonna take care of it because it is not going to, it doesn't have any higher power that takes care of it. So we are, in a way, part of the orphan planet, where the planet has a lot of in loads of religions and also and we call it modern Mother Earth, like it's our mother. But at the same time, this mother is an orphan. So that gives you an idea of how this idea of treating nature, the dynamics of humans interacting with nature, completely misses the lack of action that we're doing towards our Mother Earth. So it seems very unfair that this mother is orphan and is taking care of us whilst we're not doing anything for her.
I think that this idea of maternal sacrifice making the world go round in terms of humans is something that I explored in the haiku about the mother potato
Hmm.
giving up its life and becoming a husk. I was really shocked the first time on my allotment when I realized what happened. The seven pearly potatoes, the babies, actually had devoured the life of the mother potato. And it was a bit shocking, really. But I think that if you look at humans, actually, maternal sacrifice is expected, really.
Yeah.
Hopefully, less so now. Um, but I think this idea that Indigenous people have of Mother Earth is something that we need to listen to
Hmm.
because they put it right.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think it's very interesting, and we have to we need to try to dig a bit more into these narratives that have been there for centuries, and we have to realize why so many cultures in history have talked on and on and on about it. There must be some reason there, and we shouldn't lose touch with that narrative in a way. So this kind of brings us back to those narratives in a way, bringing the importance of our Mother Earth and the reason. I mean, it's the whole title, only one Earth. As we only have one mother, we only have one father, and that's it. So in the same way, we only have one Earth. I think it all kind of links together very beautifully. Um, so just to wrap up this call, this amazing evening. Um, Although I wish we could talk on and on about it because there are so many poems and there's so many great discussions that we could go for. But just to end this, I would like to know what is the hope that you feel this poem should give away to the readers?
Well, the last two sections are called stewardship and then beyond. Stewardship speaks for itself, really, the way that we need to look after and nurture the earth. Um, the poems in beyond are bleak, but it says, this is actually what will happen if we don't look after the earth, really. And beware of our legacies as a species that has become the apex predator and destroyed so much. I mean, we can still save it, and offer hope. I hope at the end. Um, Otherwise, it would be too bleak, really. So I think if I've made anyone by reading the poems take up the call to action, I would be more than happy, and my knife has not been wasted. Is the time to read Ants Get a Bad Press?
Awesome. We're all ears.
This is my then 3-year-old granddaughter and myself. Squatting on our haunches on the lawn, Ada and I looked down at the ground at a crisscrossed web of grass. Ada hates insects, but we are transfixed by myriads of ants scurrying along invisible paths, silently minding their own business inside their hidden metropolis. Such collectively intelligent, self-organizing life beneath our feet, whilst in the world above, humans are voting for warlords.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing reading of the last poem of this evening. And just to say a few words about it, I think there is a very soft beauty about how kids interact with nature and how magic it feels for them. For example, you mentioned the insects, how there's a myriad of ants scurrying along invisible paths. So isn't it incredible how these very tiny animals manage to create these incredible structures and build their own homes? And in a way, it makes us think of a microcosm of humans, like a city, for example. And how would it feel to suddenly have someone, for example, um, build something on top of the mound of ants and their little caves? It would be the equivalent of a meteorite basically falling onto the city. So this, you know, looking closely at nature, paying attention to our surroundings, to the little insects, to the animals, to the birds, the sounds, these gets us closer in a way to nature and to giving it its deserved worth. And so I think also there is a slight criticism of society in at the end of this poem in which you know you you make a contrast of the hidden metropolis of the ants and how efficient they are and self-organized. And then you go and say, whilst the world above, being the humans, they are voting for warlords. So there is a very interesting takeaway in this poem, which is not only that nature seems to be even more civilized than ourselves as humans, but how harmonious they're able to work and interact with each other, whereas we tend to be struggling so much to find connection and amongst each other, amongst humans. So it's a really interesting contrast, and I don't know if you'd like to add something to this ending of this poem.
Well, I just think that I'm very sad that in the process of my lifetime, I was born at the end of the war, that we progressively losing the idea of the common good. And I think that's what makes me very sad, that individualism is too important, has become too important. I just would like to go back to the idea of the collective good, really.
Yeah, and I think, this metaphor of the ants really makes that point. It is within our nature and within other animals' nature to build community and to collaborate and to look for each other. They are not selfish creatures, and we should try to kind of emulate a bit these animals in a way, looking closely at the way other animals interact, which gives us a really interesting insight on the way we should interact as humans as well. Is not to say that we should act like animals, of course, but perhaps there are insights that and conclusions that we might come up with, which are life-changing for ourselves and for others, um, and how we work as a society, talking even in politics, for example, or our economic systems. It's all in the advantage of who? Just ourselves, our community. So I think the metaphor of the ants is just it couldn't be more telling, this poem. Um, and I think it's a great poem to end this evening with, because it will keeps us thinking about our humanness in the world. And I really would like to thank you for for writing this amazing collection. Every single poem here just breathes inspiration uh, to do better in our world and try to change things um, in the current situations that we're facing. So I really want to thank you for your time and your talent as well. It's not easy to come up with a full collection and to really have it, um, you know, to have this incredibly important and timely message delivered in such an entertaining and poetic outlet. So thank you very, very much for it. And for everyone who would like to read more poems like this collection is full of them. It's called Only One Earth, and you can find it, well, at the moment it's on Amazon, but later on you will be able to purchase it from nearly any library, including Barnes and Nobles, Waterstones, etc. So yes, go ahead and get your copy and support small publishers. As always, it's really good for our local communities, and to carry and to keep up this poetic community as a Poetry Lighthouse, and also Pat Farrington, this incredible poet that you have just discovered tonight. If you haven't read her before, because she already has other two collections, so also make sure to check out her other collections, including Imperatives, Lifespan, and Web of Being. Thank you very much. If you have anything else you would like to add, Pat?
No, just to say thank you for believing that I could produce 22 new poems, sight unseen. That was quite scary, actually. But you were wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming this evening. I hope you enjoyed the poems and the conversation, and that you have a lovely rest of the evening as well, wherever you are. So fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good
Thank you.
one.
Thank you all for coming and for listening. And it was fun reading the poems. And I hope that you might enjoy them too.